Honda NSX looked like a car that had arrived from the future, but not to shout, intimidate, and pretend to be an exotic beast. It came for something much more difficult, to prove to Ferrari, Porsche, and Lamborghini that a supercar could be not only fast, but also logical, comfortable, reliable, and perfectly engineered. In 1990, the world of sports cars was full of compromises. Ferrari could amaze with its looks and sound, but it could also be temperamental. Porsche had its legendary reputation, but its rear-engine layout demanded respect. Lamborghini was spectacular, but not always practical. Then Honda appeared, a brand associated with motorcycles, reliable compact cars, and technological precision, and decided to build its own supercar from scratch. The NSX was not meant to be a Japanese copy of a Ferrari. It was meant to be the answer to the question of what a modern sports car would look like if it were designed by engineers with no insecurities, no attachment to tradition, and no willingness to accept the typical flaws of exotic cars. A mid-mounted V6 engine, aluminum construction, titanium connecting rods, the VTEC system, excellent visibility, everyday usability, and handling refined with the help of Ayrton Senna made the NSX more than just a challenge to Europe. It exposed its mistakes. And when the NSX-R arrived in 1992, Honda proved that beneath that perfect refinement, there was also a brutally precise track machine. The story of the Honda NSX began in the mid-1980s, when the Japanese manufacturer decided to enter territory that until then had been reserved for the European aristocracy of motoring. In 1984, the HPX prototype, or Honda Pininfarina Experimental, was unveiled. It was a futuristic project created in cooperation with the Italian design house Pininfarina, featuring a mid-mounted V6 engine and a silhouette typical of the wedge-shaped dream cars of the era. The concept was not yet the finished NSX, but it contained the most important idea. Honda wanted to create a sports coupe with an engine mounted behind the driver that could compete with Ferrari. Initially, various powertrain concepts were considered, including a smaller capacity V6 engine, a V8 unit, turbocharging, different transmission layouts, and many structural variations. More than a dozen test vehicles were built, and the engineers analyzed not only performance, but also ergonomics, visibility, reliability, and comfort. This was important because Honda never intended to create a car that only looked impressive on a poster. The goal was a car that could be driven fast without fighting the mechanics, without an uncomfortable driving position, and without the nervous behavior typical of exotic cars. The project consumed enormous resources, reportedly around $140 million, and production was prepared in a dedicated facility in Tochigi. This was not a side project for engineers. It was one of the most ambitious projects in Honda's history. When the NSX prototype was shown in 1989 in Chicago and Tokyo, the world saw something completely different from previous Japanese sports cars. The Toyota Supra, Mazda RX-7, and Nissan 300ZX were excellent cars, but Honda aimed higher. The NSX was intended to become the first true Japanese supercar. The name stood for New Sports Car Experimental and perfectly reflected the character of the project. The car was not merely a more powerful coupe with a larger engine. It was a technological manifesto. The body was designed with low aerodynamic drag, stability, and outstanding visibility in mind. The cockpit was inspired by the F-16 fighter jet, especially its bubble canopy, which provided the pilot with a wide field of vision. In the NSX, the driver sat low, but could see surprisingly well for a mid-engine car. This was one of the features that immediately distinguished the Honda from many exotic rivals. Ferrari could provide a sense of drama, but the NSX provided a sense of control. The interior was not theatrical, it was logical. The switches were located exactly where they should be. The seats were comfortable, the air conditioning worked, the gearbox operated smoothly, and the car could be driven without the feeling that one would soon need to forgive another Italian eccentricity. It was precisely this normality that was the most revolutionary aspect. Honda demonstrated that a supercar did not have to be temperamental. It could be an instrument of precision. The greatest technical revolution of the NSX was its aluminum construction. Honda created the world's first mass-produced road car with a fully aluminum monocoque body and structure. At a time when many manufacturers still relied on steel construction, this was an exceptionally bold solution. Aluminum was used not only in the body, but also in many suspension and engine components. Thanks to this, weight could be reduced while maintaining high rigidity. The aluminum structure itself was significantly lighter than a steel equivalent, and the weight savings had a major impact on handling. Depending on version and equipment, the NSX weighed approximately 1,365 to 1,400 kilograms. It was not an ultra-light track car, but for a comfortable supercar with full equipment, it was outstanding. The drag coefficient was around 0.31, an excellent figure for its class. Weight distribution, thanks to the centrally mounted engine and the fuel tank positioned between the passenger compartment and the engine, was approximately 42% at the front and 58% at the rear. This gave the car a balance that drivers quickly came to appreciate. Honda did not want to create a car that won only through power. It wanted to create a car that utilized every kilogram, every degree of suspension geometry, and every driver input. That is why the NSX had such a profound influence on the way people thought about supercars. The heart of the 1990 Honda NSX was the C30A engine, a naturally aspirated V6 with a displacement of 2,977 cubic centimeters. The unit featured a 90-degree bank angle, 4 camshafts, 4 valves per cylinder, sequential multi-point fuel injection, individual ignition coils, and aluminum block and cylinder heads. Most important, however, was the VTEC system, which provided variable valve timing and variable valve lift. Initially, the NSX was not even guaranteed to receive VTEC, but the decision to include it proved crucial. Honda's engine could be smooth and flexible at lower revs, but once it reached the upper range, it transformed and breathed like a racing engine. The VVIS system, or Variable Volume Intake System, further improved cylinder filling. Output in manual transmission versions was approximately 270 to 274 horsepower, depending on the market and measurement standards, produced at over 7,000 revolutions per minute. The red line sat at approximately 8,000 RPM, and fuel cutoff came even higher. The engine used titanium connecting rods, an extraordinarily exotic feature for a production car. These rods helped the engine rev eagerly and gave it a lightness of operation that many rival V6 engines lacked. It was not a brutal engine, but it was precise, responsive, and full of character. Power was sent to the rear wheels through either a 5-speed manual transmission or an optional 4-speed automatic. The automatic version had reduced power, which is why, for purists, the true NSX has always been the manual variant. Honda's gearbox quickly earned a reputation as one of the finest transmissions in the sports car world. The short, precise movements of the shifter, excellent gear ratios, and effortless operation made changing gears part of the pleasure rather than an obstacle. The drivetrain was supported by a limited slip differential, while traction was managed by the TCS system, which could be switched off. The suspension was based on double wishbones at each corner, with forged aluminum components, coil springs, dampers, and anti-roll bars. The steering system was refined to ensure the car remained predictable even for less experienced drivers. This was where Ayrton Senna's testing and feedback became particularly important. The Brazilian driver, closely associated with Honda through Formula One, had the opportunity to drive NSX prototypes, including at Suzuka, and point out areas requiring improvement. According to many accounts, his feedback contributed to increased chassis rigidity and more refined handling characteristics. As a result, the NSX was not merely a fast car, it was a car that inspired confidence. In the world of mid-engine sports cars, that was priceless. The performance of the Honda NSX in 1990 was very impressive, although not shocking in terms of raw power alone. Acceleration from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour took approximately 5.5 to 6 seconds, depending on the version and testing method, while top speed was around 270 kilometers per hour. Ferrari 348 may have carried greater prestige and a more dramatic image, but the Honda was easier to drive, more predictable, and more thoroughly engineered. Testers praised its balance, braking, steering response, visibility, and build quality. Most importantly, the NSX forced the competition to react. In Maranello, it became impossible to ignore the fact that a Japanese manufacturer had exposed the weaknesses of the Ferrari 348. The Ferrari F355 that followed was dramatically improved, and many observers believe the influence of the Honda NSX on that evolution was significant. Porsche could not ignore such a refined rival either. The NSX did not destroy European supercars, because brand heritage and emotion still mattered enormously, but it changed the standards. From that point on, exotic cars could no longer justify poor ergonomics, difficult operation, and lack of refinement solely through the prestige of their badge. Honda demonstrated that it was possible to combine a mid-mounted engine, outstanding handling, high revving performance, exceptional build quality, and everyday usability in a single package. That was a genuine breakthrough. In 1992, Honda introduced the NSX-R, a version designed for those who believed the standard NSX was too civilized. The regular model was brilliantly balanced, but some more demanding drivers criticized it for being slightly conservative. It was fast and precise, yet so thoroughly refined that certain enthusiasts wanted a sharper edge. Honda responded in a distinctly Japanese way, not by adding huge amounts of power, but by reducing weight, increasing rigidity, and meticulously refining details. The NSX-R, also known as the NSX Type R, was created exclusively for the Japanese market and was available only in right-hand drive form. From the outside, it did not look like a completely different car, but in terms of character, it was far more uncompromising. Honda removed many features considered unnecessary. Much of the sound insulation was deleted, along with the audio system, air conditioning, spare wheel, portions of the electrical equipment, and numerous comfort-oriented components. Standard seats were replaced by lightweight Recaro bucket seats, lightweight forged NK wheels were installed, and the suspension received significantly stiffer settings. The result was remarkable. Weight dropped by approximately 120 kilograms, bringing curb weight down to around 1,230 kilograms, or slightly more, depending on source and specification. This transformed the car more dramatically than additional horsepower ever could. The engine in the NSX-R remained fundamentally the same C30A unit, but Honda treated it with extraordinary care. Selected engines were assembled and balanced with greater precision, using techniques derived from racing engine construction. There were reports of blueprinting and more meticulous balancing of the crankshaft and rotating components. Official output remained within the limits of Japanese industry agreements and was often quoted at around 280 horsepower, although the true figure may have been slightly higher. More important was the way the car responded. A shorter final drive ratio improved acceleration and responsiveness, while a more aggressive limited slip differential helped transfer power to the road more effectively. The suspension underwent substantial revisions: stiffer springs, revised dampers, a stronger front anti-roll bar, different bushings, and altered alignment settings were introduced. The goal was to reduce sudden oversteer on the track and give the car a more direct character. The NSX-R was no longer a luxurious supercar designed primarily for fast road driving. It became a sharp instrument. It still used the same engine displacement, and it still looked like an NSX, but every reaction was more immediate, more focused, and less filtered by comfort. The performance of the NSXR improved not because Honda turned it into a monster of horsepower, but because it removed everything that stood in the way of pure driving. Acceleration to 100 kilometers per hour could fall below 5 seconds, while top speed was around 260 kilometers per hour, since the shorter gearing favored acceleration over outright maximum speed. On a racetrack, however, the difference was far greater than the numbers suggested. The NSXR responded more quickly, turned more sharply, engaged the driver more deeply, and gave the sensation that the entire vehicle had been cleansed of compromise. This is precisely why it became one of the most sought-after versions of the first-generation NSX. It was produced from 1992 until 1995, with approximately 483 examples built. That is a very small number, especially considering that the car was offered only in Japan. Today, the NSX-R NA1 is regarded as one of the most important collector-grade JDM supercars ever created. It combines analog character, rarity, the philosophy of the Type R badge, and a level of engineering purity that is difficult to replicate in modern automobiles. It was not a cosmetic special edition. It was a true engineering model. In the years that followed, Honda continued to develop the NSX, but always with remarkable restraint. In 1994, larger wheels were introduced. In 1995, the NSX-T arrived with a removable Targa roof. Then, in 1997, the most significant technical update in the model's history took place. Manual transmission NSX received the new C32B engine, with a displacement of 3,179 cubic centimeters, or 3.2 liters, along with a 6-speed manual gearbox. Power increased to approximately 290 horsepower, while torque improved noticeably. Honda enlarged the cylinder bores, introduced thinner cylinder liners, larger intake valves, revised head gaskets, larger connecting rod bearings, and a new stainless steel exhaust manifold. Bigger brakes were also installed, along with upgraded ABS software and a refined power steering system. In Japan, the company introduced the Type S and Type S0 variants, which continued the philosophy of lighter and more focused performance models. In 2002, the NSX underwent its most visible facelift. The iconic pop-up headlights disappeared and were replaced by fixed xenon lamps mounted beneath clear covers. The front end was redesigned, aerodynamics were improved, and the suspension received further refinements. Japan also saw the return of the NSX-R, this time based on the updated NA2 platform. However, for many purists, the original 1990 NSX and the 1992 NSX-R remain the purest expression of the concept. Production of the first-generation NSX continued until 2005, which in itself demonstrates how advanced the original design had been. During those 15 years, Ferrari evolved from the 348 to the F355, then to the 360 Madonna, and finally to the F430, while Honda continued refining the same fundamental platform. In total, just over 18,000 first-generation NSX were produced worldwide, including both Honda and Acura-badged examples. That is not a large number for a 15-year production run, but it was enough to establish the model as a globally recognized icon. Approximately 483 examples of the NSX-R NA1 were built, while the later NSX-R NA2 was limited to roughly 152 cars. There were also rarer variants, such as the Type S, Type S0, and the extremely limited NSX-R GT. In the United States, Acura introduced the special Alex Zanardi edition, produced in only 51 units to commemorate Alex Zanardi's success in the kart championship. All of this means that the world of the NSX is now filled with collector-focused nuances. An early manual coupe is already highly valuable, but Type R, Type S0, and later NSX-R variants belong to the absolute elite of Japanese collector automobiles. Rarity, condition, mileage, originality, and market specification all play a major role in determining desirability. How much can a Honda NSX be worth today? Standard first-generation examples are no longer inexpensive Japanese classics, as they were a decade or two ago. Well-preserved manual cars from the early years of production often command prices ranging from around 60,000 to well over 100,000 euros, while exceptionally low mileage and highly original examples can sell for considerably more. In the United States, Acura NSX values have also risen dramatically, especially for manual transmission, accident-free cars in original condition. Facelifted models, 3.2-liter versions, 6-speed manual cars, and rare color combinations can achieve even higher prices. The NSXR occupies an entirely different level of the market. For an NA1 NSXR, buyers must think in terms of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the finest examples can approach or exceed values that were once reserved only for legendary European exotics. Record-breaking sales of NSXR models demonstrate that the market now regards them as some of the most important Japanese supercars ever built. Anyone seeking a top-quality 1992 NSXR today should expect to pay several $100,000, while exceptional examples with extremely low mileage and complete documentation may be worth significantly more. In practice, the NSXR has become an investment-grade automobile, but its true value comes from more than rarity. It comes from the fact that it was one of the first Japanese cars accepted worldwide as a genuine alternative to Europe's automotive elite. The Honda NSX is an icon of motoring because it changed the definition of a supercar. Before it, many exotic automobiles demanded patience, compromise, and a willingness to forgive flaws. The NSX proved that it was possible to build a mid-engined machine that was fast, precise, beautiful in its technical purity, and at the same time reliable and easy to use every day. It was the first production car with an aluminum monocoque structure, featured titanium connecting rods, a high-revving V6 equipped with VTEC, sophisticated double wishbone suspension, and ergonomics that many rivals could only envy. The NSXR added a second chapter to that story by proving that the same platform could become a completely uncompromising driver's machine. It did not require enormous power figures or theatrical gestures. Lightness, precision, rigidity, and engineering consistency were enough. This is precisely why the NSX inspired people such as Gordon Murray, who regarded it as a benchmark during the development of the McLaren F1. There can hardly be a greater compliment for a sports car. The 1990 Honda NSX and the 1992 NSXR are icons because they demonstrated that Japan did not need to imitate Ferrari. It could create something equally great, but according to its own principles, precise, logical, reliable, and filled with genius hidden beneath a calm surface.